Thank you so much for coming. My name is Lisa Phillips. I'm a professor at Osgoode Hall Law School, and I'm also Associate Vice President Research. And it's really in that latter capacity that I had the opportunity to work with the Faculty of Graduate Studies to bring this session together. And I am so delighted to see how many people are interested in learning more about public service careers. I think this is extremely good news for our federal public service. And it's my pleasure now, just before we introduce our special guest from Human Resources and Skills Development Canada, to introduce Karen Krasny, the Associate Dean Academic in the Faculty of Graduate Studies.
Thank you, Lisa. On behalf of the Faculty of Graduate Studies at York University, I welcome you all to this special career orientation session focusing on public service careers. We're especially pleased that Dr. Anthony Giles from Human Resources and Skills Development Canada has found time to share his insights and considerable experience related to the pursuit of career opportunities within the federal public service. Anthony Giles was born in Montreal, Quebec. He holds a Bachelor of Administration from Concordia University in Montreal and an MA in Public Administration from Carleton University in Ottawa and a PhD in Industrial Relations from the University of Warwick in the United Kingdom. Dr. Giles began his academic career as an assistant professor in the Faculty of Administration at the University of New Brunswick in 1983. He was promoted to associate professor in 1987, and in 1988-89 he served as associate dean of graduate studies of that faculty, and in 1990-92 as associate dean. In 1992, Anthony Giles accepted an appointment as assistant professor in the Department of Industrial Relations of Laval University. He was promoted to associate professor in 1997 and to full professor in 2001. During his tenure at Laval, Dr. Giles served on the executive board of the Canadian Industrial Relations Association and as the organization's secretary-treasurer and as the associate editor of the journal Relations Industrielles, Industrial Relations. While at UNB and Laval, Dr. Giles conducted research and published on a variety of topics, including comparative and international industrial relations, public policy, collective agreements, industrial relations theory, globalization, and management of work in multinational firms and work reorganization. From 2001 to 2002, Dr. Giles was granted leave from Laval in order to serve as Director of Research of the Secretariat of the Commission for the Labor Corporation in Washington, D.C., where he was responsible for coordinating the Commission's research into North American employment law, labor markets, labor relations, and human resources management. In 2004, he also served as the acting executive director of the Secretariat. In July 2004, Anthony Giles was appointed Director General, International and Intergovernmental Labor Affairs in the Labor Branch of Human Resources and Skills Development Canada. In October 2007, he was appointed Director General, Strategic Policy, Analysis, and Workplace Information in the same branch. At this time, I take great pleasure in presenting to you Dr. Anthony Giles.
Well, good afternoon. Next time I'll send the short version of my bio so that we don't eat up so much time with every detail of my background. Well, thank you very much for inviting me here this afternoon. Can you hear me okay? Am I holding the mic close enough? Yeah, nod if you can, yeah. I should just say a few words about why me here at York, just to give you a sense of context. A number of years ago, the federal government decided that it wanted to tighten its relationship with universities, try and create a kind of two-way road where government draws more on the resources universities have to offer and vice versa. And so in typical bureaucratic fashion, it was decided that what they would do is take each deputy minister in the federal government, the deputy minister is the highest civil servant in each department, and assign them to a particular university, and they would call them the champion of the relationship between the federal government and that university. So my deputy minister, whose name is Hélène Gosselin, was lucky enough to be assigned York University as her championship. And so in discussing with York University how we could sort of build better bridges between the federal government and York in particular, one of the ideas came up about talking directly to students about federal civil service careers. It's an obvious interest to some of you anyway, and it's an interest as well to the federal government, because even though, as I'll be saying in a few minutes, the financial situation has led to something of a reduction in recruiting, there is still an ongoing recruiting process where we're trying to bring students in every year, not least because something like 10% of federal civil servants in any one year are eligible for retirement, so we just have to, renew. So, my presence here this afternoon is really part of that overall initiative to try and build better links between government and universities. So, what I'm going to talk to you about today is working for the federal government. I'll start by bragging about how great we are as an employer. Then I'll try and give you some tips on if you really are crazy enough to want to be a federal civil servant, how you can go about getting your foot in the door. I'm going to, if we have time, give you some real-life examples of people who work in my organization who were in your shoes just a few years ago. And I've got a few audio tapes that I did with them where I asked them essentially, how did you get from university into the position you're in now? So they'll tell you that themselves. I'm then going to pass on to you some tips from a couple of my managers that I spoke to who do a lot of hiring, and some sort of heads up for you if you're interested in applying, what are the things you should be thinking about. And then I will throw it open to questions, okay? And I've got a panel of people here to tell me if I'm taking too much time. Feel free to wave or give me that sign. I'm delighted that Jordan Mellis from the Public Service Commission of Canada is sitting here. If at any time you see his head hit the table, that means I've made a mistake that he will jump up and correct. Or if you ask a question that is kind of in the technical realm of various hiring processes, he's here either during the session or immediately after to answer your questions. Okay? So, the federal public service. I guess I should start by saying one of the huge advantages of the federal government as an employer is its size. Not just its size, but the immense variety of career opportunities within an organization of this size. Nearly 300,000 employees, 1,600 points of service across the country, and present in more than 150 countries around the world. Now, not every federal civil servant gets to go to another country to work, but it is a dimension that you should be interested in, particularly if you're interested in international affairs. So, the federal government, of course, classifies things. It's a bureaucracy, so every job is classified and given a title, and there are over 1,000 different types of jobs in the government. And they range really right across the whole spectrum of careers that you can dream about or imagine. Policymaker or policy advisor in virtually any department. I, of course, mentioned my own department here. Foreign service officer or program manager with foreign affairs. wildlife biologists, we have doctors, we have nurses, we have scientists of every variety. We have, apparently, I didn't know this, test pilots with Transport Canada. So if you're in a program on aviation engineering or something, that might be something for you. So, what are the advantages? Besides the wide range of opportunities, I have to say that one of the real core advantages of a federal government career, and I will also say this applies to provincial governments as well, that most of the work involves, in some fashion or another, serving the public, serving Canadians. And you can have an impact. Now, I wouldn't want to push the compensation side too far, but the federal government is still one of those employers that offers pensions, for example, a rapidly vanishing benefit in many sectors of the economy. Flexible work arrangements. Federal government has won awards for developing workplace practices that give people the flexibility to balance their work life and their home life. I have about 70 employees working for me, and no one person starts at the same time or leaves at the same time. They pick and choose their hours. There are obviously rules. You got to show up at some point and do some work. You can't just, vanish for a few days, but in many jobs there is a lot of flexibility. Now, I shouldn't exaggerate. There are a number of federal government jobs where, because you're serving clients and customers for certain hours, well, you have to be there for those hours. But that doesn't mask the fact that, in fact, there is quite a lot of flexibility. Continuous learning is actually something that the most departments, all departments, feel very, very strongly about. In today's world, you can't treat learning as a one-off process that just happens. Now you know enough to do your job. Fine, see you in 20 years at retirement date. Learning is continuous, so employees are continually taking courses, formal courses, engaging in informal learning, like partnering with people, job swapping, and so on, all to develop both their ability to do their job, but also their career opportunities. There are opportunities for advancement. Most of the people that work for me, it's not their first job, not their first place within the federal government. They're sort of moving along through their careers. And there's a fair amount of mobility. Reasonable. The person who did the first draft of this put just security. And I decided to add good security because in today's world, no one ever has perfect employment security. But relative to other places to work, the level of security is quite high. So if you don't believe me about this, let me tell you, on the plane down this morning, I looked across the aisle and there was an employee or an ex-employee of mine sitting right across the aisle. She left our unit about a year ago. And so she said, what are you doing? And I explained where I was coming. And her eyes got really wide and she said, oh, I love working for the federal government. And I said, okay, well, tell me why so I can pass this on. And without any prompting from me, she started talking about a number of these things. And she started with the point that she felt that in her job, she works for the Privacy Commission of Canada, she felt in her job she was having an impact. She was doing something that she was proud of and could see a real effect on people. She also said that she liked the flexibility and so on. And then I said to her, so if you were being honest with the students, would you tell them about any downside to working with the federal government? She thought a minute, and then she said, yeah, things move slowly. So yes, I make an impact, But if I was a more impatient person, I might not be able to hack this because it's a huge organization, a hierarchy, and things move slowly. And if you can't accept that, if you're the kind of person who wants to see instant results, it's probably not the best place for you. Anyway, that's my moment of truth that is now captured on tape that I will probably live to regret. So, the current hiring climate. It's no surprise to you that governments, not just the federal government, but all kinds of governments across the world, not just in Canada, are going through, for a variety of reasons, a real period of crunch, trying to either reduce deficits or stop them from growing. And to do that, they're looking for efficiencies. They're trying to cut back in many, many ways. So if I had been here 5 years ago, I wouldn't have even been talking about this. But it's just a bit of a reality check that the hiring rate has gone down. That said, we're old in the federal government, I guess. The average age is 45 years old, which is an increase from the mid-'80s. And as I said earlier, this year or last year, I guess, nearly 10% of federal civil servants were eligible to retire. Now, that doesn't mean 10% will go, because just because you're eligible to retire doesn't mean we kick you out the door. However, it does give you an indication of when we sit down and think about our human resource planning, we're very, very conscious that however tight the restrictions are, if we're not continually bringing people in at the starting levels, then we're going to get caught short sometime. So in 2011 and 12, which I guess is the last year that the statistics were available, the federal government still hired over 5,000 people in the midst of all of this search for reductions and efficiencies and cutbacks and so on. So yeah, it's not as easy as it used to be, but there are still opportunities, and that's the main message. So, how do you get your foot in the door? Well, like everything these days, you go to a website. Jobs.ca is a website that is like the main portal, if you will, the main entrance into the job process or the hiring process. It provides, it's not just for students graduating, it's for anyone, but it does have information particular to recruiting programs for students, for graduates, and as I said, vacancies for all. There are a number, on your way out the door, there are a number of bookmarks sitting on the table up here that you're welcome to take. It gives you the address of that site. So, recruiting programs for students. I want to talk about 3 programs in particular that are specifically for students because they can be quite useful. And they are the Federal Student Work Experience Program that we all call FSWEP, the Post-Secondary Cooperative Education and Internship Program, and then the Research Affiliate Program. Now, again, in 11-12, as you can see, a little more than 13,000 students were hired by the federal government through those 3 programs together. Largely FSWEP, but a significant number through co-op and then a smaller number through the RAP. So these are 3 government-wide programs that apply right across the system. There are a number of departments and agencies in the federal government that also have specific recruitment programs that they run themselves. Through that website, you can identify what those are and be linked to them for further information, but they tend to be more specialized, so I'm not going to talk too much about them right now. There is also something called the Post-Secondary Recruitment Program, Now that's a program, and the timing of today's presentation is perhaps unfortunate from that point of view. It's a program that's usually run in the fall, and it's designed specifically to recruit a pool of potential employees from graduating classes. The way it works is you go into the process, you're not actually applying for a specific job per se, you're applying to be eligible for in the hiring pool, and then when managers need employees, they can go to this pool, and it's a group of pre-qualified, if you will, people who they can then choose from. So if you are going into your last year, for example, or second to last year, you should watch out for it next autumn, okay? The Recruitment of Policy Leaders program is, I'll call it an elite program. They take a handful of people every year, very carefully selected, and then place them often in positions that aren't actually at the very bottom or the starting level. They start them somewhat higher. Just to give you the idea that this is real, 2 days ago, we got the annual list of people who have been put into this group this year, and the invitation has gone out across the government. Here are 18 or 20 people that you might want to look at. So that's another targeted program that's quite useful. And then, as I said, there's specialized recruitment programs that are run through various departments. Now, I'm going to give myself a break. So I talked to some people who worked in our organization who, as I say, were in your shoes a little while ago. And I essentially asked them how they got into the federal government. So as long as the sound system works here, So good morning, Vincent.
Hello.
Thanks for doing this. Let me start by asking you just to explain how you ended up working for the federal government. What mechanism of hiring did you go through?
Okay, well, when I was doing my master's degree at Carleton University in 2008, I applied to the SWEP program, and shortly afterwards, I was requested to come for an interview, and I got a student position where I currently work now. While I was completing my degree, I continued to work as a student in this unit, and later on, once I had graduated, I was bridged in. So I was hired directly through FSWEP.
Okay. What unit are we talking about here?
Oh, sorry, I'm in the Labor Law Analysis Unit, which is a part of Strategic Policy and Workplace Information Division.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what do you actually do at work?
A whole lot of different things. What my unit does, we give policy advice, and we focus a little more on legal issues. So for example, if there's a proposal to, say, if they're considering introducing new legislation or amending existing legislation, then we will look at what the provinces have done, what courts have said, to try and give a bit of a background as to what is out there. That said, I've worked on quite a few different things. I've prepared briefings for senior officials on recent legal developments, everything from that to writing correspondence for the minister. So quite a fair bit.
Okay, thanks. That gives people a bit better sense, I think, of what some of these jobs entail. Let me also ask you, if you were giving advice to students who were interested in preparing themselves or applying for a career in the federal government, what would you tell them?
Okay, well, first of all, I would say, first of all, my advice is from the perspective of someone that works in policy. if you're interested in working in a more operational capacity, keep in mind that I'm coming from this particular area. But in any case, while you're a student, the first thing that I would say is to take advantage of every student hiring program or mechanism that's available. For example, the FSWEP program is a great way to get experience. When I was contacted for a position in where I work now, I had never previously worked for the federal government. So it's if you don't have experience before, you can get it through this. So the second thing that I would say is if you're interested in doing policy work, a lot of, quite a few jobs will often ask for someone that has an undergraduate degree in economics, sociology, or statistics, or to have some coursework done in that area. That's, when you're picking your courses, that's definitely something to consider. I have my undergrad is in political science, but I took quite a few classes in sociology and economics, and so that was able to satisfy that criteria. So that's just something to keep in mind when you're choosing your courses. Another thing I would say is that while you're still in university, take advantage of any French classes that are offered. It's very helpful in your career development to have at least a basic bilingual level of French. I know people that when they were hired were not bilingual. However, it is an advantage to both get in and also to move up. So I would say that.
That's good advice.
It's definitely something. And one more thing, I've noticed that in more and more job opportunities these days ask to have a master's degree in a relevant area, such as sociology or political science or public administration. That doesn't mean that it's necessary for every job, and it doesn't mean that you have to have a degree in those areas. I mean, my master's is in Russian, but just saying that if you are considering to do a master's, or if you are considering to do one, it's definitely something to keep in mind.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. And just lastly, for any student who decides to go this way and gets into the process of writing tests or exams or doing interviews, is there anything that you would like to tell them?
I can't speak directly to the general exams that you do, for example, the post-secondary recruitment program, as I was not hired through that. But I have participated in a number of, I have written a number of exams, and I've also been on interview boards for people. So I can give you some general advice for preparing for interviews or writing exams. In many cases, if you're doing an exam that is not a general standardized test, it will be quite specific to the position that you're applying for. When you're getting ready for that, don't hesitate to ask the hiring manager for any ideas or
documents.
Exactly. Just it won't hurt to prepare yourself ahead of time for that. When you're in the interview itself, trying to think of things that I could say. What would be a good tip?
How about responding to the questions that are posed to you?
Okay. I would say that when you're writing, when you're doing an interview, first of all, it benefits you to be very concise and clear with your responses. This is helpful, one, just to show that you're prepared, you're confident, and also it helps the interviewers because in the federal government, the interviewers have to take very detailed notes of the staffing process. So it'll help them highlight the core parts of your answers. It's not uncommon to have questions, situational judgment type questions. So that's just basically, what would you do if you were in this position? And I have noticed in many jobs that I have applied for, There might be a question about your knowledge of the department or the ministry. So you might get a question of what's the who is the everything from say who is the minister or the assistant deputy minister to basic questions that what is our mandate, what do we do. So it'll be very helpful to it'll help you a lot if you come into an interview prepared with answers for that.
Okay. Oh, that's very good advice. Okay, let's wind up just by asking you a surprise question. Do you have any regrets about joining the federal government?
Oh, that's a tough question. Well,
And I'm not taking any notes.
all right. Well, what I will say, to be honest, to be completely honest, and not just because you're asking me this, Tony, I'm quite happy with my job. And as far as regrets go, nothing immediately comes to mind. But I will say a few things that are, I guess, things that I wish I had known, or things that, that you might wish you know too, if before working for the government. The one thing is that it sounds obvious, but working for a bureaucracy is very bureaucratic. That doesn't mean that work is slow. There's more than enough stuff to do, but there's a lot of processes that you have to go through for everything. For example, if I'm working on a file, I might have to do a lot of coordination with other people, say distributing draft copies of things I've worked on, getting feedback. There's a lot of steps to go through in your work. So that's not necessarily, I don't necessarily find that a bad thing, but it's something to keep in mind because it's not like many other workplaces in that respect.
Okay, that's true.
Yeah. Yeah. Another thing I would say, and this doesn't affect me personally, but it might affect you, is that while the federal government employs a lot of people all over the country, for policy work, much of the work is done in the Ottawa-Gatineau area. So if you are looking to go into policy and to build a career in that area, that is something to keep in mind if you are particularly attached to Toronto or to another city.
Mm-hmm.
So,
oh yeah, that's also very good advice.
Yeah.
Well, listen, I know, I happen to know you're very busy today working on one of those complicated files. So let me just thank you, Vincent, for taking the time to do this, and thank you on behalf of all the students who are listening to you now.
All right. Well, thanks a lot.
Thank you. Yesterday, I taped this Friday. Yesterday, Vincent spent part of his day in a taxi running across town back and forth, getting a document signed by various people that had to go into, that's going to cabinet Tuesday. So when he talks about having to do a lot of coordination and being very busy, he's not exaggerating. I'm going to just play one more of these. I want you to hear from Stephanie, who is a graduate from York University. Okay, if I can find the mouse here. Okay. Hi, Stephanie. Well, thanks for giving me a little bit of your time. What I'd like to start off with is just asking you how you ended up working in the federal government.
Hi, Tony.
Hi.
Hi. I was doing a master's program at Glendon College, which is part of York University, a master's program, and part of the program is a co-op component. Mm-hmm. And so I did my co-op term with the labor program. Okay. And from there, I really enjoyed my experience and was able to be hired back on a casual basis over the next summer after I finished my degree. And then I was offered a term position with the labor program. So the co-op provided me with the easy entry point to working for the labor program.
And that's what's called bridging, right?
Yes.
Okay, so that students who work for the federal government, either part-time or as a co-op student or an intern, then subsequently they can be hired into other positions after they're finished their studies in a simpler, faster way than the normal process. Is that right?
That's right.
Okay. What did you do that first summer as a co-op student?
So I worked on a government-wide regulatory initiative called the Red Tape Reduction Commission. And so I got to work with different areas within the labor program and in a working group to work on streamlining regulations and provided me the opportunity to put the theory that I had learned into practice.
Okay. And what are you doing now? What's your job now?
So now I am working in a different area. I'm working for Assistant Deputy Minister Kim Choi in his office, and I provide support to the Assistant Deputy Minister as well as his special advisor on policy files and communications.
Okay, great. So you're a rising star. The second question I guess I want to ask you is, do you have any advice for the students who are listening to this and thinking about a career in the federal government? Advice both in terms of, the application process that you went through and any preparation they should be thinking about.
Sure. I think that having a master's degree is very valuable to open doors to the federal government. So my experience at the Glendon School of Public and International Affairs opened a lot of doors for me in that respect, and provided me with a solid understanding of public policy issues to begin my career with the federal public service.
Okay.
So I would really recommend doing a master's degree and also doing a co-op program or FWEP as a way to find an entry to the federal government.
How about the actual process, like tests and interviews and so on? Is there any advice you'd give people about how to prepare for that? How do you dress in an interview?
Well, nothing too flashy, I don't think. But I think that being fairly, formal without being too formal.
Okay.
But I would wear, for example, a skirt and a suit jacket and heels, no shoes. Yep.
Okay, that's good. In terms of if you were in your last year or talking to a student in their last year and saying, if you had some electives to take, what sort of courses do you think are that they should think about to prepare themselves for this sort of career?
I think that having an interdisciplinary background is really important. So having a varied experience in different courses, economics, statistics. So if you're coming from an arts background, try to diversify yourself in that respect and expose yourself to those areas.
That's good. Well, listen, thanks for taking the time to do this with me. On behalf of all the students that I'm looking at in the room right now, I thank you.
Thank you so much.
Okay, I had a third one taped, but I don't want to take up too much time. I do want to leave time for questions, so I'll tell you a bit about Sebastien. But first, I should mention one, or try and reinforce one thing, the phrase bridging. The reason both of those students stressed that is because from a hiring point of view, bridging a student in, that is hiring someone into a position who has been a student, is a lot faster and a lot simpler than the normal hiring process. And that's why there's a tendency on the part of managers to look first to see if there are qualified students available for a position, because from their point of view, it just saves time. So even though some of the student part-time job opportunities might not be intrinsically, aimed at developing your career, it is a strategy for getting into that group of people who can be subsequently hired easily, okay? I'll just tell you, Sebastien actually went through the public service recruitment program. He was at another university in Toronto, doing a master's degree, and he saw, the autumn program, went along, did a written test, was called back, did some interviews, didn't know what was going to happen from it, and then nothing, dead silence for 4 or 5 months, and then the phone rang, or he got an email or something, and one of my managers actually said, look, I saw your CV in this group of people. Would you be interested in coming for an interview? And 2 months later, he was working for us. Okay? So that's another route into the federal government. So I'm going to just finish up very, very quickly with a couple of tips from the managers I spoke to last week about what, from their point of view, they wanted you to know about what was important about the hiring process. The first thing that they all drove home is the importance of, the first written contact, your resume and your cover letter. If you're applying for a particular job or a job in a particular field, they said, 2 things. Speak in your letter to the specific things that are being sought for. Don't, just talk about what a grand person you are. Yes, we believe that, but you have to tell us why you're qualified for the job in direct terms. And if you can, give us examples from your own experience that show that you not just are saying you can do such and such or know such and such, but that you've actually lived it, okay? They also said, please don't send 10-page letters because we have hundreds to read through and we get annoyed. If you get to the stage of exams and interviews and references, well, the people who just spoke gave some tips. I guess what I would add as someone who is, often sitting in interviews, interviewing people and so on, is the real importance of answering the question that you're asked. Often we give the questions out ahead of time, like half an hour ahead of time, say, take some time, read them over, think about it, come in. And the number of very intelligent people who come in and talk about something else other than what's in the question would astound you. And you sometimes feel like reaching across the table and saying, look again at the question. It sounds simple, but some people just try and fill up the airtime instead of responding to the question. And one of I can't remember, Stephanie or the other guy who spoke, talked about the need to take notes. In the federal government, because of the emphasis on treating everyone fairly and getting rid of subjective elements, every interviewer takes detailed notes of every answer given, so that if anyone ever comes back and says, well, you favored so-and-so over so-and-so, they have all their notes to prove it, to prove that they didn't. And so that's, again, why it's very important to be kind of concise and on point, okay? What else did they say? References are important. They're not just something that we just stick in the back of the file. We actually call people and talk to references. So be careful about, choosing those. The The other stuff is a little bit more bureaucratic, know the expiry dates. Sometimes when a pool is created, it doesn't last forever, so you just should be aware of that. And there are issues around language, security checks, citizenship, and permanent residency that you just need to be aware of. And I guess their point there is, when you're going through the application process, read carefully what's being required of you, so that you don't get too far along in the process and then realize, whoops, I didn't qualify. Yeah. Okay. In a number of the processes, we're not hiring for a particular position. What we're doing is creating a pool or a group of people who are pre-qualified for a certain range of jobs, on the expectation that some of those jobs will open up, okay? And then a hiring manager looks in the pool, that is to say on the list, for anyone who has gone through the process and is qualified and then meets the criteria they're looking for, okay? So often to create a pool, the criteria are fairly wide. But if I'm hiring someone, I need someone with knowledge in a particular field. So in that pool, I'll look for someone with a degree in economics, for example, if I'm looking to hire an economist, and then narrow it down that way, okay? Those pools typically have an expiry date, am I right? Could be a couple of years, could be shorter than that. So if you're in a pool, it's just, the idea is just know how long it's going to exist, so you just know what's going on. Well, one example is the public service recruitment program. That functions as on a pool basis, okay? So every autumn, there's a process where you can apply through the Public Service Commission. Is it the commission that runs it? And it creates a pool of, I don't know how many we're talking about, how many would go in. It depends on the year. A couple of years ago, I remember it being several thousand people were there. So, what a manager does afterwards is basically search through the list using keywords to find people. But the advantage of it is this, that you're not just sitting out there looking at a website going, oh, I see a job posted that I'll apply for, and then you start the process. The advantage is you are pre-qualified. You've been through a written exam, you've been through an interview, you're considered hireable, if you will, and then the only question is, are your particular mix of qualifications going to be needed by a particular organization over the next year or so, okay? Okay, well, that's a good segue into other questions because I'm more or less finished with my tips and advice and so on. So let me throw it open, yeah.
As you may know, a CV is different, an academic CV is different than a resume in terms of work experience.
Oh, I know, because I've worked in both worlds. my academic CV is about 42 pages long, and my government one is 2 pages.
So when we're applying, what should we submit?
The 2-page one. Yeah. Oh. You're, okay. Okay. Yes. But you have to go to the microphone, or else I'm in trouble.
Hello.
Hello.
Is it on? No. Yes? Okay. So you talked about the two places, see in my notes down there. The PSR and the RPL, are they both accessible from the website that you gave, www.jobs,
Yes.
employees.ca, yeah.
Yeah, those are programs that are run like one time a year. So there's general information about them. And then when the window opens for the program to run every year, then they're accessible from that same website.
Yeah, you said the one is still open until the 15th of October?
Yeah.
RPL?
Yeah.
So it would be on the website?
Yeah. Anyone else want to make the journey to the microphone? Run, run.
Hi. I was just wondering, with the pools, are there provincially specific pools, or is it a pool for all of Canada? Are there regions? How is that divided up? Like, if you're in the pool, could you be offered an interview in Manitoba, or is it all over the place?
That's a good point. I believe they're national. I don't know if applicants or people in the pool specify whether they're mobile or not, so that the manager, like if I'm hiring someone who, needs to work in Gatineau, Quebec, whether I can screen out anyone who says I'm not leaving Winnipeg for any reason. Mm-hmm. I just don't know. Do you know, Jordan?
In most external job applications, when you apply online, you'll be able to select which work locations you're willing to work in. So make sure you really choose the ones that you want to work in, because you might get a call for somewhere else just because you checked everything. So, don't waste everybody's time, but so choose the ones where you're really willing to go for that particular job, and that should help narrow that down.
In terms of the interview, if you are even here, and one of my managers, for example, spotted your name, experience matches, or educational criteria matches, they will often conduct an interview by phone instead of in person, because they have that flexibility. I've seen cases where the manager travels because they can fix up 2 or 3 interviews on a day in a different city. Now, they won't travel across the country. But I also have seen cases where we've said there's a element to the job where it's really important that we see you face to face and get a sense, say, of your communication skills and so on. And so you really do need to come and do the interview here. Okay? Yes. The traveling microphone. You've had a question already. I'm teasing. Go ahead.
If you have political party experience, should you mention it?
Okay, I don't know I'll give you my just off the cuff advice, and you guys tell me, feel free to say, no, I disagree, okay? My advice would be to, assuming the experience was more than just door knocking, right, that it was some sort of experience related to the job, then I would advise you to say it, but not necessarily identify the political party. Or just say, I worked for a political party doing background research on issues. To me, that would be relevant to know. And if I was hiring someone from a policy, we don't, I don't know the political affiliations of all the people who work for me, but what I do know is they're right across the spectrum, and we don't care. Because once you join the Federal Civil Service as a federal civil servant, you still carry your political beliefs in your mind and in your private life, but at work, you are expected to put them aside completely. And that's something that we stick to very hard. So we don't necessarily screen anyone out or anyone in because of any political background, okay? Because the assumption is you park it at the door when you walk in. You care to contradict or no? That was okay.
Hello.
Yeah.
Thank you for coming today. I was just wondering, I was actually accepted to the FSWEP program during my undergrad and worked for Parks Canada. Mm-hmm. I'm just wondering, just in my own interest, when I was actually going through the interview process, one of the things that they ask you, of course, they go through these behavioral situational things. And my favorite question at all is, what do you perceive as part of your weaknesses? And it's such an arbitrary question to answer because your fear when you're answering it, oh God, if I say that I'm, chaotic sometimes, or that I spit when I chew or something, I mean, what precisely should you say or what you don't say? I mean, how do you really answer that question?
I'll give you two answers because it's one of the ones that's used over and over again, and I've had to answer it in many cases. And there may be better answers than, I'm not saying this is the magic answer, but there's basically, well, three strategies. One is to look up at the ceiling and go, don't have any weaknesses. Probably not a good idea. The second is to pick something that is actually a strength, but you are pretending it's a weakness. So one answer I've given in the past is I've said, well, one of my weaknesses is I'm too meticulous. And so it sometimes takes me a little longer to get things done because, I believe in things being, really well done and so on. And so what I'm trying to do is sell a strength disguised as an answer about a weakness. The third strategy, and just as effective, I think, is to name a genuine weakness, but then go on to say how you came to recognize it and how you have worked on improving it. So if you say one of my weaknesses is I spit when I chew, so I came to recognize that because, I've lost a good friend that way. And so I've taken chewing lessons or something. No, but more seriously, I'm too meticulous, so I've learned to achieve a balance between meeting deadlines and meeting my own standards, and so I work on that continuously. So it shows the interviewer not just you're aware of a weakness, but something you've done proactively about it.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Hi there. I just wanted to ask, a couple of the students that you interviewed spoke to the benefit of having a master's degree, and sort of the rumor or mentality a lot of graduate students have is that having a PhD can overqualify you for certain entry-level positions with the government. Can you speak to that? Is that actually the case from the government side of things?
I can't speak for across the government. Certainly in the organization I work in, a PhD would never overqualify you. We would never say, well, for most positions. There may be some clerical positions, for example, where we would question whether the person really was a good fit for a job filing, if they had a PhD in biochemistry or something. But as long as it's in the general area, PhD may not be required, but I've never seen it used like for an analyst or anything like that as something where it would hurt someone. I have jobs in one of my units where we actually require a PhD. That's a specialized unit that does econometric research and so on. So I would say no. One of the managers I talked to has a PhD in economics from Laval University, and when I was chatting with him last week, he said, one thing that never occurred to me when I was even a PhD student was whether the federal government was a place to even think about. And it opened his eyes when he actually was approached by someone who knew his thesis supervisor or something, was offered the job, and when he arrived, he really realized how many people did have PhDs, and not necessarily that it's an essential criterion, but it can be a help. Okay? So I wouldn't hide the fact unless you're applying, Yeah, Yes.
Hi there, I'm Charlene.
Hi.
Hi. I just have a quick question with regards to your hiring practices in terms of minorities. So to be clear, let's say you had an applicant pool of, say, 100 people. Is there a specific percentage set aside for minority groups in Canada?
There's no specific percentage set aside. The federal government, there's a law that exists that actually my organization applies, which is called the Employment Equity Act, federal statute, that applies to firms under federal jurisdiction like banks and railways and so on, but it also applies to the federal government itself. And that act does not set quotas in the sense of, you know, here's the percentage of visible minorities or Aboriginal people or disabled people and so on. But it does encourage employers to set targets for hiring that approximate the availability of those groups in the labor force. And then employers are supposed, if they don't, for example, if there are, in a particular regional job market, 20% of the people are visible minorities, and they have 0, then they're supposed to set targets and develop plans. And in the hiring process, they say quite explicitly that we are actively seeking, might be disabled people, it might be visible minorities, another group. But when it comes down to the actual decision, it's a factor that's taken into account when other things are equal. So if in a hiring process you interview 20 people, 3 of them are essentially, you know, very, very similar top grade, then the manager may choose the person who's a visible minority if they've identified themselves that way, for that reason. But it's not to fill a quota, and it's not, it doesn't override qualifications.
I see. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. No heads hitting the table here about that explanation of employment equity?
Hi. Can you talk a little bit about the requirement to be bilingual? One of the examples talked about hiring people who were not bilingual, but subsequently they did speak French, and was that through an internal program that you have to get people qualified?
Yeah, we do hire, there are some positions that you have to be bilingual from the get-go. But there are many, many positions where one language or the other, depending on the region of the country, is perfectly okay. The point, I think it was Vincent was making, is that career advancement in the federal civil service often does require ability to speak and write and read both languages. So, yes, you can be hired as a complete unilingual person. Yes, there are all kinds of programs to help employees develop or polish their second language skills. There is, you know, a rating system inside the government about levels of language ability, and so often someone who comes in unilingual will sort of work their way up through those levels. There may be cases where people just have a perfectly long and fruitful unilingual career if they're in a region in the country where it's not really needed, but their mobility then is limited. And their upward mobility gets limited at a certain point. There's a category of positions in the federal government called executive positions. And the basic qualification for anyone to be an executive is, you know, not a perfect ability in the second language, but a pretty good one. So if you have any aspirations to go higher or to be mobile, then you really need to work on it. And Vincent's point is, why not start beforehand if you have the opportunity? Okay? What I will say is that I've seen in just the short time I've worked for the federal government a shift in the kind of training we offer employees in language. partly for the cost-cutting reductions cost-cutting that I talked about earlier. There's been a shift away from kind of sending people into classrooms or giving them tutors and so on, and a shift toward giving them online tools, more group classes, and so on. And so what I'll sometimes say to my employees who are in one language or the other trying to improve their second language, take some of the responsibility yourself. Don't just assume it's the employer's responsibility, that we should think of it as a shared responsibility. So go take a course at night, or, you know, my favorite is listen to the radio or television in the other language, you know. So I guess what I'm trying to say is, yes, there's lots of tools available and help, but it's also becoming seen as a joint responsibility. Okay?
Thanks. Hi.
Hi.
My question is regarding the interview process. Generally, are interviews conducted by a team of employees, or is it mostly like on an individual basis with a manager, or?
Yeah, we don't trust individual managers to do anything by themselves. The standard is 3 people. It can be 2 in some circumstances. Rarely would it be 4, but you know, the standard is 3. Sometimes that's a manager. In Vincent's case, he's an analyst who's been asked to sit in on hiring boards for more junior analyst positions. So it varies, but I've never seen a case where it's one-on-one. Have either of you? No. And that's partly because of the need to make sure the process is done as fairly as possible. So if you have 2 or even 3 people who are listening, taking notes, and then comparing notes and coming to a consensus afterwards, you're more certain of the final decision than you would be if you leave it in the hands of one person. That's the thinking.
Okay.
Okay?
Perfect, thanks.
I don't want to yell. Can you hear me? Okay. I just want a clarification about actually the bilingualism question, because you seemed, because the person was talking about French specifically, but you were kind of talking foreign languages. So I wonder, does French, I assume, has kind of a preference, or does knowledge of other foreign languages actually help you up in the rankings? Because you said you had different rankings with those. How does that work?
Okay. They're treated in 2 different ways. French and English, because they're the official languages of the country and the official working languages within the government, are the 2 primary ones. So third languages can be an advantage for particular kinds of jobs. A number of years ago, 3 or 4 years ago, I was hiring someone into a position that involved negotiations with South American and Central American countries. So I didn't actually make knowledge of Spanish an absolute requirement, but we have a system where we say, here are the essential qualifications you have to meet, you know, walk, talk, chew gum at the same time, you know. And then we have what are called asset qualifications, which, okay, you don't need these to apply, and you might even get hired without them, but if we get 6 people qualified and one of them has 1 or more of these asset qualifications, we might choose them for that reason. So I put knowledge of Spanish as an asset qualification. So it's really job-specific knowledge of a third language being an advantage. I will say, though, that if you have a knowledge of a third language, you should work it into a letter, should be clear on your resume, because even though it might not be specific to the job, it may be the sort of thing that a hiring manager kind of notices, and it may have a positive influence, and it certainly wouldn't have a negative influence. Okay?
Thank you.
Hi.
Hi.
I was just wondering if there are any specific programs for international students who want to make that work to school to work transition in Canada, or would they have to apply through the same programs you listed earlier?
Specific international ones, I will turn to my experts. If anyone, do you know of any?
In most cases, there's preference for Canadian citizens within the jobs, right? So that can cause a bit of a problem, but I haven't seen anything specific like that.
I will mention, though, that you remember Stephanie. She was doing a master's degree in, let me see if I can get this right, international and policy and international studies at Glendon. They have a co-op program. And I know, not her, but several of her classmates found international jobs in that co-op program, working for federal government agencies. One worked for the UN and so on. And so there are opportunities, but I don't know of a specific targeted program.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
I think I just got the question reversed. I thought it was for students who are coming here to study from abroad. So that's why I meant the thing about the citizenship. But there was the Foreign Service Officer position in the PSR that just closed now, running through Citizenship and Immigration. So that does happen.
So can you give us a list of which programs, what are the means to get into the public service aside from directly applying to a job for those who don't have an opportunity to have a co-op in their program?
Well, there's the FSWEP program, the Federal Student Work Experience Program. There is the Post-Secondary Recruitment Program. There is the RAP, which is the Research Affiliate Program. And there's the Policy Leaders Program. So 4 specific programs for students other than co-op and internship programs.
Mm-hmm. So SWEP, Policy Leadership, and what was the 2 other ones?
The Research Affiliates Program. Oh, and the Public Service Recruitment.
On the website, there's a menu at the top. There's a drop-down for students and a drop-down for graduates. So you can find all the information what those programs are.
Okay.
With that handy bookmark.
The last one you said public service what?
A recruitment program. Post-secondary recruitment program,
Okay.
sorry. I think PS and
Hi. I was wondering, what is the interview process like? So you mentioned there's a written test, and how long can you expect the wait after you write a test? Then what's the next step? Is it the security check, or you got called in for an interview? What's the different stages before you're offered a job?
I think there may be some variations between the different programs about the order you go through. In the post-secondary recruitment process, my understanding is you start with a written test. Pardon? Online written. Really? Okay. Online written test. And then there must be a screening based on your CV and so on. And then, well, let the experts.
With the PSR right now, this year they have 2 online unsupervised tests that you take at home. When you have to take it in within a specific window of days to do it. Well, that's the thing, is that the next step will be to back it up. Those who pass those ones may be invited to write the supervised tests that correspond to the same types of skills. And then from there, it can go into interviews, or if the departments want to do other testing.
to the questions and answers you've got. Hi, I've been listening to questions and answers you've got, and one of the things that I've noticed applying it for the federal government is that the requirement of French is heavy. And so when you guys say there's some positions that take French and some don't, I sort of beg to differ as somebody who's a job seeker. Second of all, what is it that you're looking for? I know this is a vague question, particularly in a resume. You know, sometimes there's some of the positions will say they're looking for more experience. Some of them will be some, you know, pulling programs that require students who have less experience and more education. It's really very vague. So out of the session, I really haven't pulled anything out that I can move forward, because in a resume, what do you look for? What are the things that stand out to you? Do you look for more education? Do you look for more experience? How do you manage to put in a resume your academic background, your work experience, your education, and, you know, fit that all in 2 pages without being too wordy?
Sure, it's a challenge. Typically, and I don't know if this works under all the programs, typically what I see in the hiring I do is there's a resume, but there's also a cover letter that, but that depends on the process, okay? I guess the critical thing is 3 or 4 main items that I would look for in a 2-page resume. One is if there are particular language skills required, some indication of that. Second, if there are educational qualifications required, the resume should be precise about what degree and what stage and so on. Is it completed or ongoing and so on, because that can make the difference. The third is experience, and again, it depends on the kind of job, because the experience that's required is going to be tailored to the particular job being offered. What I will say is that when I look at someone's resume and are attempting to assess whether their experience matches the qualifications required, then I'm not looking for the title of a job they've done in the past. I'm looking for a short explanation, a line or 2 that says what you did in the job, or even what you did in the volunteer sector, because that can be relevant as well. And does it match what we're looking for? So if we say that we're looking for experience in, just pick international affairs or relations, then what in your experience actually makes you qualified to do that? If we have judged that we need someone who has at least some experience, what are you listing, what are you saying about what you've done that convinces me that, okay, they probably do. We might test them on it in the interview, and so on. Is it a challenge? Yeah, it's a challenge. But think of it from the point of view of the other side, where you might have, in some cases, thousands of applications to go through, or more practically hundreds. If a resume or a cover letter is not direct and concise, if the message is buried in it, then your chances drop. So it's I have to say, a bit of an art to surfacing those. Okay?
Okay, thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much for all the questions. We're going to have to wrap up this session. We will be providing the names and email addresses of all those who attended to Tony. And just so you know that there is a possibility of some kind of more additional communications from FGS, from my office, from his office. There may be other bits of information that follow, given your expressed interest in the federal public service. So thank you very much for attending, and thank you to Tony for a very informative session.
Pleasure.